This is a really exciting time to be visiting these reefs, particularly from a mangrove perspective.
We know quite a bit about mangrove forests, how they develop and how they respond to environmental changes like sea level rise. But we don't have a very good understanding of how those things operate in barrier reef systems in northern Australia.
We're visiting 10 islands in 7 days, and across each of these islands we've got data sets that show us what the extent of the mangrove forest used to be 45 years ago and also 90 years ago. And in all of them we're seeing very dramatic changes to the mangrove communities.
And we've been able to undertake surveys to see where it's distributed and the structure of that vegetation. 9.7 metres and 9.5 metres. What we're finding is that on some islands the rhizophora is quite expansive, and on others it seems to be in much earlier stages of development.
We're really here at quite a dramatic time, in the sense that we know that by comparing today's distribution of rhizophora with what was mapped in 1928 and 1974, we've seen some really dramatic changes. So some of the things that we've seen are advancing fronts of forests. So forests that previously were mapped as small patches on the windward side of the reef flat are now occupying a much larger section of the reef flat. We've seen forests marching, say, at rates of about 5 metres a year, 5 or 6 metres a year, and that equates to several kilometres worth of extension.
So when we undertake our surveys, one thing we'll do is to run out a transect perpendicular either to the land or from the seaward edge of a forest, and we'll run that transect a long way into the forest, and we'll survey which trees are growing at which elevations and distances along that transect.
On this trip we're using drones, so we typically spend a day in Ireland and we land and we set out our ground control points, and then we stick a drone in the air and it flies along a predetermined flight line up and down until it's covered the island, taking photographs at regular intervals, so that when we come back to the boat in the evening we can plot up the location of those photographs and then do some image processing on them, and that's the way that we make our maps in a more of a modern contemporary sense using the latest technology.
We're also taking measurements of the tree structure, so how tall is that tree and what is the width of that tree around its trunk. And this information tells us a little bit about perhaps how old these forests are, how they're developing over time, and these measurements of the tree height and width tell us about the biomass in this tree. So we're getting our first understanding of how much carbon is stored in these forests around us. We know that these ecosystems are real powerhouses in carbon storage. They store carbon above the ground in their trees and below the ground in their roots and in the substrates.
Mangroves, of course, are very valuable assets to the reef environment. They act as nursery for fish that live out on the reef. They'll come in and breed among the mangrove roots and then head back out to the reef to live the rest of their lives. Mangroves filter any sort of pollutants that come off the land before they're heading out into the marine environment. And they also act as important protective barriers for things like storms.
So undertaking fieldwork in settings like this presents a whole lot of challenges. One, just walking through an ecosystem like this, it's more like climbing through it. You've really got to be your inner monkey and get amongst the trees here just to get through the forest to undertake our surveys. There's generally insects around, mosquitoes or midges, so we pack the repellent. The other thing we've got to watch out in tropical North Queensland is for crocodiles. So it's a lot of hard work, but it's rewarding by knowing that you're contributing to some generation of some baseline data and bettering our understanding of these important ecosystems that we love.